HOA destroyed my lakefront resort, Part Hunty beginning. The morning they delivered demolition orders for my grandfather's historic waterfront pavilion was the morning I understood that Barbara Whitmore had absolutely no comprehension of what she was attempting to destroy. It's 5:45 on a Thursday morning, and I'm standing on my weathered dock, steam rising from my coffee mug, when I noticed official county trucks rolling down the gravel access road. Through the early morning haze, I watch as building inspectors approach the structure my grandfather Antonio built by hand in the same pavilion that provided shelter and community gathering space for over 100 years. The same building that this control-obsessed HOA president determined didn't align with her concept of upscale, waterfront, elegant. But here's what Barbara Whitmore and her elite Lakeside Manor Board didn't comprehend about historical riparian access rights in South Carolina. My grandfather Antonio didn't simply construct a waterfront pavilion. He secured perpetual water management rights to the entire lake system. And I just uncovered something significantly more powerful than any homeowner association regulation: the legally documented authority to regulate water flow that supplies their $7 million resort development. Drop a comment below. What would you do if someone attempted to demolish your family's legacy? And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how many of you have confronted these HOA tyrants. My name is Daniel Rivera. I'm a civil and environmental engineer, and 5 months ago I inherited the most breathtaking lakefront property imaginable. My grandfather, Antonio Garcia Rivera, purchased our family compound back in 1918. Immediately after returning from serving in the Great War overseas. But the authentic architectural treasure was the waterfront pavilion. Antonio didn't simply assemble some basic docks and storage buildings. This extraordinary man hand-selected old-growth timber from the surrounding forests and constructed a proper recreational facility that functioned as the community's social center for generations. For over a century, that waterfront pavilion served countless community members: local fishermen preparing their equipment before dawn expeditions, children learning water safety in the protected swimming area, neighbors exchanging tools and friendship. It represented the heartbeat of our lakefront community. When I inherited the property, my wife Elena and I had dreams dancing through our minds. We'd been meticulously saving every available dollar, planning to eventually retire there within 6 years. I'd restore the main residence, perhaps establish an independent consulting practice from the renovated office, spend my afternoons fishing from the antique wooden dock. The distinctive scent of pine wood mixed with lake water was therapeutic for the spirit. Then Barbara Whitmore materialized in the picture. Barbara's the kind of individual who coordinates her designer accessories with her luxury vehicle and drives a pristine white Mercedes that's never touched anything resembling wilderness terrain. She relocated to the Lakeside Manor exclusive development 2.5 years ago. That's the prestigious gated community that appeared on the opposite shoreline like aggressive weeds overtaking native vegetation. Within 7 months, she'd strategically maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency through calculated political manipulation. I should have anticipated trouble approaching when that first certified letter arrived at my mailbox. The envelope possessed that foreboding weight, you understand, the kind that creates immediate stomach anxiety before you even break the seal. Inside sat Barbara's meticulously composed correspondence declaring that my waterfront pavilion violated community architectural aesthetic standards and must be demolished immediately. I actually laughed out loud, genuinely chuckled. My pavilion was standing proudly when her development was nothing but undeveloped lakefront and fishing camps. But Barbara had completed her preliminary research, or believed she had. The letter referenced HOA Covenant 47.3, lakefront architectural compliance requirements, and threatened me with $850 in daily penalties if I failed to remove the historic structure within 30 days. That's when I began excavating through storage containers in my grandfather's dusty attic, ancient legal papers that carried the scent of decades and forgotten history, yet legitimate legal documents, nevertheless. I discovered the original water rights certificates, the historical boundaries survey records, and most significantly, the grandfathering protection clause that explicitly safeguarded all existing waterfront structures. My pavilion was literally older than the HOA by 8.5 decades. Armed with my comprehensive documentation, I appeared at the subsequent HOA meeting in their luxurious community clubhouse. You know, that distinctive atmosphere of institutional spaces, expensive air fresheners, climate-controlled air, and the subtle aroma of suppressed resentment. That was my introduction to homeowner association political warfare. I arranged my historical legal papers across their polished conference table revealing a winning hand in championship poker. "Ladies and gentlemen," I stated with measured confidence, "I believe we have a fundamental misunderstanding here that needs immediate clarification." Barbara barely acknowledged my carefully prepared materials. Her response still ignites absolute fury in my chest. "Standards evolve constantly, Mr. Rivera. Progressive development demands reasonable adaptation." She delivered it with this condescending smile, as though explaining elementary school concepts to someone intellectually challenged. The board decision was entirely predetermined, 6-2, supporting immediate enforcement action. Barbara's loyal supporters, all recent wealthy transplants with excessive financial resources and minimal common sense, completely overwhelmed the longtime residents who actually remembered what authentic community spirit meant. Walking toward my pickup truck after that contentious gathering, the crushed limestone crunching beneath my work boots, I understood something absolutely crucial. This wasn't genuinely about architectural guidelines or progressive development vision. This was fundamentally about dominance and control. Barbara observed my modest waterfront pavilion, my working-class heritage, my practical utility truck, and instantaneously concluded I didn't align with her exclusive luxury neighborhood fantasy. She wanted my complete removal from the area. Elena attempted maintaining realistic optimism throughout the ordeal. "We'll challenge this properly through legal channels," she said during dinner one evening, gripping my hand tightly across our small kitchen table. "The law clearly supports your documented position." I nodded agreement and smiled reassuringly. Yet internally, I was genuinely questioning whether legal correctness would ultimately prove sufficient. What I hadn't yet discovered was that Barbara had foolishly initiated serious conflict with precisely the wrong environmental engineer. You see, I didn't merely understand complex building regulations and property statutes. I understood comprehensive water management systems. Barbara didn't waste valuable time transitioning from legal intimidation to direct action. 4 days following that contentious board gathering, I'm departing from my downtown office when I noticed 2 individuals wearing identical branded security shirts positioned strategically near my property boundary line. Private security personnel at 6:30 in the morning on a random Wednesday seemed suspicious. "Good morning, gentlemen," I called out casually, insulated travel mug in hand. "Can I help you locate something specific?" The senior guard, built impressively like a former professional linebacker, retrieved an electronic tablet device. "HOA Compliance Enforcement Team, sir. We're officially documenting property violations for the record." I nearly choked on my morning coffee. Property violations. Such as what exactly? Lawn vegetation exceeds HOA maximum height standard of 3.5 inches in multiple designated zones. Waterfront pavilion requires complete repainting according to lakefront aesthetics policy guidelines. Dock structure needs professional pressure cleaning treatment. Kayak storage area violates visual clutter prevention ordinance. He was mechanically reciting this material, like reading a mundane grocery shopping list. Over the following 2.5 weeks, these hired contractors systematically documented me for practically every conceivable infraction, except breathing too loudly. My entrance gate was supposedly the incorrect specific shade of forest green. My outdoor patio furniture was categorized as non-compliant. They even formally cited me for having fishing equipment visible from the public waterway. By the 3rd week, I was reviewing accumulated fines totaling $1,850. That's when I did what any competent professional engineer does when directly confronting a systematic problem. I thoroughly investigated the complete operational system. Turns out, Barbara's spouse, Richard, owns Whitmore Property Management Services. Remarkably convenient. Correct. The HOA was compensating her husband's private corporation $3,750 monthly to systematically harass property owners into absolute submission. I dedicated an entire evening on the state contractor registration database website and uncovered something genuinely fascinating. Richard's property management professional license had expired 11 months previously. He'd been functioning completely illegally this entire extended period. Here's an important knowledge nugget for you. In South Carolina, HOA enforcement contractors must maintain current active state licensing identical to any commercial service provider, and frequently they absolutely don't comply. Always meticulously verify their official credentials before accepting any violation notices. But I wasn't remotely finished with my thorough investigation. I contacted a trusted colleague who performs commercial property compliance assessments. We conducted a methodical examination around Barbara's immaculate luxury estate one Saturday afternoon. Her elaborate deck expansion project, absolutely no construction permits whatsoever. Her detached guest cottage structure, built precisely 9 inches beyond the mandatory setback requirement. That elaborate Japanese meditation garden she constantly photographed for social media. According to the historical survey documentation I had located, it encroached 5 feet onto protected conservation wetland. Barbara had been systematically violating environmental protection regulations for 3.5 years. The following Monday morning, I submitted comprehensive formal complaints with the state licensing authority regarding Richard's Property Management Services Company and officially requested a complete professional boundary survey. I didn't create unnecessary theatrical displays, just processed everything like any standard engineering problem. Document absolutely everything thoroughly. Follow all established protocols precisely. Allow the factual evidence to communicate itself clearly. Barbara's response was entirely predictable and expected. Within several days, I started hearing concerning whispers at the local marine hardware supply store. Daniel Rivera's being completely unreasonable and difficult. He's actively damaging neighborhood property values with that deteriorating old pavilion. Some people simply don't comprehend necessary progress. Elena returned from the weekend farmer's market one Friday, appearing visibly troubled. The organic vegetable vendor wouldn't make direct eye contact, she said quietly. And Mrs. Henderson from the pottery artisan shop treated me like I was carrying highly contagious disease. That's when the anonymous malicious accusations started flowing consistently. Someone contacted the State Environmental Protection Agency claiming my waterfront pavilion was actively leaking hazardous toxic materials into the pristine lake. Another anonymous informant reported that I was illegally dredging the protected lakebed without proper permits, which was absolutely absurd since I'm a licensed environmental systems engineer who professionally monitors water quality for my career. But here's where Barbara committed her first genuine strategic error. While she was occupied playing neighborhood political authority, I was doing what I genuinely excel at: methodically analyzing technical engineering documentation. I'd filed a comprehensive public information request for absolutely anything concerning historical water access rights and flow management control systems around our entire waterway system. What I discovered buried in those archived county historical files made me sit up perfectly straight in my kitchen chair. There were detailed engineering diagrams I'd never encountered previously, showing intricate water management flow patterns from the 1920s era, comprehensive technical assessments from my grandfather's generation, and most intriguingly, official documentation of something specifically termed Primary Riparian Management Authority that had never been legally transferred to the HOA organization. I spent that entire weekend walking methodically along the complete waterway perimeter with an experienced engineer's analytical perspective, genuinely studying how the water current naturally moved. The luxury resort development that Barbara constantly promoted enthusiastically, the exclusive facility that was supposedly dramatically elevating our community's prestigious status, had a critical structural weakness. Their entire commercial operation depended absolutely on maintained consistent water depth. Their expensive boat slips, their upscale waterfront restaurant, their $1 million floating entertainment pavilion, all of it confidently presumed the lake would remain exactly at current optimal levels. The distinctive smell of marine construction fuel still permeated the surrounding air from their ongoing construction activities, and I could tangibly sense the profound contradiction. Barbara was so intensely fixated on my modest historic pavilion that she'd never bothered investigating the larger comprehensive hydraulic system. I drove home that contemplative evening with fresh comprehensive understanding of my actual circumstances. Barbara sincerely believed she was playing strategic political games, skillfully manipulating her HOA authority around the board to force my permanent departure. But she hadn't recognized I wasn't just another ordinary property owner she could easily intimidate. I was the trained professional who thoroughly understood how water actually functions according to physics. Barbara's subsequent aggressive action arrived with the subtlety of a freight train collision. I'm working productively in my home office studio one Tuesday afternoon when I hear multiple heavy vehicles approaching outside. Not just one single vehicle, 5 county government trucks and a stern woman in an official safety vest carrying the type of authoritative clipboard that instantly destroys your entire afternoon. Danielle Rivera, the official inspector, appeared like she'd rather be absolutely anywhere else imaginable. Anonymous safety report about serious structural concerns with your waterfront pavilion. I'm here to perform a comprehensive safety evaluation immediately. Anonymous safety report, naturally predictable. I could practically detect Barbara's expensive designer fragrance drifting subtly in the afternoon breeze. The thorough inspection consumed 6 complete hours. This unfortunate inspector meticulously examined every single component of my grandfather's exceptional craftsmanship with sophisticated laser measurements and advanced moisture detection equipment. When she finally concluded, she possessed the professional courtesy to appear genuinely uncomfortable. Mr. Rivera, your waterfront pavilion is remarkably structurally sound as the day it was originally constructed. She hesitated noticeably, consulting her official tablet. Whether current updated regulations require comprehensive flood resilience upgrades for waterfront structures of this specific dimension. Estimated compliance cost is $5,300. You have exactly 12 days to file detailed improvement documentation, or we'll need to issue a formal condemnation order. $5,300 for flood protection upgrades in a pavilion that had successfully survived every major hurricane and tropical storm for a full century. But here's where Barbara demonstrated truly calculated manipulation. The inspector provided me a professional business card alongside the official citation. Whitmore Construction Services handles this specific type of work. Richard Whitmore provided a preliminary estimate of $18,500. Claims he can complete everything within 10 business days. I examined that business card like it was potentially venomous. Richard Whitmore, Barbara's husband, volunteering to conveniently resolve the exact problem his wife had systematically manufactured for $80,500. What absolutely remarkable timing! That evening, I initiated several strategic phone calls. Started with the State Contractor Licensing Authority, where an extremely helpful representative named Michael accessed Richard's complete profile. Sir, Mr. Whitmore's general contractor professional certification expired 29 months ago. He's not legally permitted to perform any construction services commercially. Next communication was to my trusted contact at the County Engineering Department. Daniel, that flood resilience requirement only applies to new construction projects and substantial renovations. Existing historic structures are completely protected unless they're demonstrably unsafe. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Riparian water rights in the American Southeast frequently predate contemporary property regulations. They can legally supersede HOA rules, municipal ordinances, and occasionally even governmental acquisition authority. Armed with this crucial information, I decided to examine those historical water rights materials significantly more thoroughly. What I discovered buried in the county historical archives made my hands physically tremble with profound realization. My grandfather Antonio hadn't simply constructed a waterfront pavilion and residential property. He'd maintained comprehensive primary riparian rights to the complete lake system granted during the historical period, when this was still undeveloped rural territory. Those rights specifically encompassed something designated as absolute flow regulation authority. In straightforward terminology, I could lawfully control water depth and flow throughout the entire connected lake system. This was going to change everything. HOA destroyed my lakefront resort Part 2. I dedicated the subsequent 4 days meticulously studying comprehensive engineering assessments from the 1920s lake development project. Absolutely fascinating technical material. Genuinely. The original designers constructed elaborate diversion channels that could strategically redirect water current around the primary control structures. My grandfather's waterfront pavilion wasn't merely positioned for aesthetic waterfront access. It was strategically situated to manage a sophisticated secondary flow regulation system that connected directly to the main lake controls. Meanwhile, Barbara was actively executing her systematic character destruction campaign throughout the neighborhood. She'd somehow successfully persuaded 5 of my immediate neighbors that I was mentally unstable and potentially threatening to community safety. I returned home one Thursday evening to discover new high-definition surveillance cameras aimed specifically at my property from 4 separate residential properties. Elena noticed immediately when she arrived. "Sweetheart, Mrs. Martinez won't even acknowledge us anymore on the street." And Tom at the boat repair marina behaved like I was radioactive contamination when I requested replacement dock hardware supplies. The critical breaking point arrived when Barbara officially petitioned for a formal protective restraining order, alleged I'd made specific intimidating statements about the lake waterway controls and represented a clear, imminent danger to community welfare and safety. The county magistrate carefully examined her submitted evidence, which consisted exclusively of my legitimate public records requests and my reasonable inquiries at HOA gatherings, and dismissed it entirely without hesitation. But the severe reputation damage was already accomplished. Half the neighborhood currently believed I was some variety of unbalanced domestic extremist. That's when I made a revelation that fundamentally transformed everything. I was meticulously reviewing the luxury resort developments, comprehensive environmental impact assessment documentation when I noticed something critically important in the detailed technical specifications. Their massive construction financing had extremely precise requirements about maintaining consistent water depth levels. If the lake waterway dropped below a specific designated level for more than 72 consecutive hours, their complete $7 million construction loan would become immediately payable in full. The resort's grand opening celebration was scheduled exactly 3.5 months away. Substantial advance payments had been collected for exclusive yacht club memberships, elaborate waterfront wedding venues, professional fishing charter operations. Barbara's immediate family had personally invested $900,000 of their own capital in the ambitious venture. Her husband Richard had co-signed the massive construction loan using their luxury estate as primary security collateral. I sat in my modest kitchen that contemplative night examining those loan documents and realized something profoundly significant. Barbara sincerely believed she was conducting a straightforward battle about HOA regulations and waterfront aesthetic standards, but she'd foolishly initiated serious conflict with someone who thoroughly comprehended the one critical element her entire development absolutely required. Water doesn't respect HOA bylaws or political connections. It flows according to fundamental physics and established legal precedent. And I was beginning to understand that I possessed significantly more authority than any HOA president could ever legitimately claim. The metallic sensation of chronic stress had been my constant companion for weeks, but that night, it transformed into something completely different. The distinct taste of strategic advantage. Barbara's composure finally shattered completely the week before the Independence Day holiday. I'm collecting my daily mail when I observe her marching aggressively across the street in those impractical designer sandals, clutching another official manila envelope like it contained explosive materials. "Mr. Rivera?" Her voice could have shattered expensive crystal glassware. "I'm scheduling an emergency HOA assembly immediately. Your waterfront pavilion represents an immediate catastrophic public safety crisis that cannot wait for standard administrative procedures." She thrust the envelope toward me with sufficient aggressive force to cause a painful paper cut. Inside was official notification for an emergency intervention meeting scheduled for the following evening. The agenda was brutally straightforward. Vote to authorize immediate pavilion demolition, with or without my legal permission. The emergency assembly was theatrical chaos and political circus. Barbara had imported her corporate attorney from Charlotte. some individual claiming to be a certified structural specialist who'd never physically examined my pavilion, yet was enthusiastically delighted to declare it hazardous. His presentation included alarming terminology like catastrophic structural failure risk and imminent public endangerment. Remarkably professional theatrical performance. The vote was rapid and merciless, 7-1 supporting immediate demolition. The solitary opposition came from elderly Mr. Patterson, an 87-year-old gentleman who'd resided here since the 1940s. Everyone else had either been financially purchased, thoroughly frightened, or successfully convinced that I was some variety of construction fanatic. Demolition contractor begins tomorrow morning at 7 sharp. Barbara announced, with barely suppressed gleeful satisfaction. Removal expenses at $26,500 will be immediately added to Mr. Rivera's HOA account. If payment is not received within 30 days, a formal property lien will be filed. $26,500 to systematically destroy something my grandfather Antonio constructed with his own determined hands. I drove home in a complete mental fog. The worn texture of my truck steering wheel the only physical sensation keeping me grounded. Elena took one look at my devastated expression and poured 2 generous glasses of wine without speaking. That night, I did something I'd never attempted before in my professional engineering career. I filed an emergency restraining order in Superior County Court. Not because I was genuinely certain it would succeed, yet because I had exhausted all alternative options. The hearing was scheduled for 8 o'clock the next morning, precisely when Barbara's demolition contractor was supposed to begin destruction. I walked into that courthouse at 7:20 carrying a document case containing historical records, riparian rights certificates, contractor licensing violations, evidence of HOA financial misappropriation, and structural assessments proving my pavilion was more secure than most county bridges. Judge Anderson listened attentively for exactly 19 minutes before reaching his determination. Emergency restraining order granted. 45-day temporary injunction issued. Mr. Rivera, you have 6 weeks to resolve this matter through appropriate legal channels. I contacted Barbara from the courthouse parking area. Demolitions cancelled, I stated firmly. You should probably inform your contractor immediately. The silence extended so extensively I thought she'd disconnected. Then, this is absolute warfare, Mr. Rivera. I hope you comprehend that reality. Here's knowledge nugget number 3. Emergency restraining orders can effectively halt HOA actions if you can demonstrate immediate, irreversible damage. But you require documented proof, not merely emotional arguments. That afternoon, I discovered something that made Barbara's warfare declaration seem almost innocent. I was examining HOA financial documentation, which are public records, incidentally, when I noticed some intriguing financial inconsistencies. Over the previous 20 months, Barbara had approved $53,000 in legal consultations and emergency contractor expenditures. Every single transaction went to corporations owned by her husband or her brother. I spent the weekend performing detailed financial investigation, cross-referencing every transaction with business registrations and corporate documentation. Barbara hadn't simply been utilizing HOA funds to harass me. She'd been treating the community treasury like her personal bank account for years. But the genuine revelation arrived when I located the lake's original hydraulic engineering survey from My grandfather Antonio hadn't simply constructed a waterfront pavilion. He'd positioned it as a regulatory control structure for what the historical documents designated Primary Flow Management Authority. The pavilion wasn't merely situated on the waterfront. It was a critical component of a comprehensive water regulation system that encompassed the main channel controls. I spent hours studying those deteriorated blueprints, the distinctive smell of aged paper filling my kitchen as I traced water flow patterns with my finger. The more I comprehended about the original design, the more I realized Barbara had committed a catastrophic strategic error. She believed she was confronting some working-class individual with stubborn principles. But my grandfather had been the supervising hydraulic engineer on this complete lake system. He'd constructed redundancy and regulation into every structure, including his waterfront pavilion. That Sunday evening, I contacted my former professor from Clemson University, someone who specialized in historical water rights legislation, After I explained the circumstances, he remained quiet for an extended moment. "Daniel," he finally stated, "if what you're describing is accurate, you don't simply own a waterfront pavilion. You own water management authority for that complete lake system. That's not an HOA dispute anymore. That's federal riparian rights law." I disconnected the call and walked out to my dock. The sensation of June evening air was humid and heavy, carrying the scent of approaching summer thunderstorms. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. Barbara had declared warfare, but she had absolutely no comprehension what resources I was about to deploy in this fight. Monday morning delivered the type of chaos that makes you question sanity. I'm drinking coffee on my porch when 3 sheriff's vehicles arrive, followed by Barbara in her pristine Mercedes and 2 individuals in expensive business attire who screamed corporate attorneys. Daniel Rebetta, the lead deputy, appeared apologetic. "We have an arrest warrant on charges of criminal intimidation and conspiracy to commit environmental sabotage." Environmental sabotage for exercising legal water rights my family had maintained for a century. My attorney Patricia had warned me this possibility existed. Within 2.5 hours, I was released on bond and sitting in her Charleston office while she worked her expertise with federal authorities. Turns out, Barbara's corporate lawyers had convinced a federal magistrate that my water rights represented an imminent threat to interstate commerce and environmental stability. The restraining order was comprehensive. I couldn't approach the lake waterway controls, couldn't operate any flow management systems, couldn't even discuss water regulation publicly. Barbara had essentially utilized the federal court system to neutralize my only strategic advantage. But Patricia smiled confidently when she read the complete order. "Daniel, they just committed a massive mistake. This restraining order acknowledges your water rights exist. They're merely temporarily restricting them. That's federal recognition of your legal claim." Within 8 hours, Patricia had filed her own federal lawsuit, asserting riparian rights violation under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 8. More significantly, she'd obtained a counter-injunction that superseded the local restraining order. Federal water rights trump local criminal accusations every single time, she explained. Barbara's lawyers provided us exactly the legal precedent we required. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Federal riparian rights enforcement can override local law enforcement actions when historical claims predate state and municipal jurisdiction. But Barbara wasn't finished with her destructive campaign. That afternoon, I discovered she'd contracted a private security corporation to patrol the lake waterway control area 24 hours daily, not just any security corporation. Former military contractors who appeared like they'd emerged from action films. Elena returned from the grocery store with news that made my stomach drop. "Sweetheart, there are television news vans at the neighborhood entrance." And Mrs. Henderson said, "Barbara's been telling people you're planning to contaminate the water supply." Contaminate the water supply. Barbara had officially transitioned from harassment into complete character assassination. The media circus exploded over the weekend. Local television stations broadcast stories about domestic eco-terrorism and water rights extremism. Barbara appeared on 3 different news programs, performing the role of concerned community leader, protecting innocent families from a deranged individual with dangerous technical knowledge. But the media attention functioned both directions. By Sunday, property rights organizations from across South Carolina were calling to offer assistance. Environmental attorneys were volunteering their services. Even some resort employees were quietly reaching out to express they supported my position. The community was dividing down the center. Longtime residents who remembered my grandfather rallied around my family's heritage. Newer residents, terrified their property values would collapse, sided with Barbara's development vision. Monday brought the extreme option Barbara had been constructing toward. The HOA board scheduled an emergency community protection assembly to authorize any and all measures necessary to prevent me from accessing the waterway controls. They'd essentially voted to hire armed security to stop me from exercising federally protected water rights. That's when Frank Wilson made a decision that changed everything. He contacted me at 5:15 in the morning with an offer that made my hands shake. Daniel, I've been operating these waterway controls for 38 years. Never witnessed such chaos over something so straightforward. I'm retiring effective immediately, and I'm recommending you as interim waterway operator under your riparian rights authority. Interim waterway operator with federal water rights and official operational authority. Barbara's private security couldn't legally prevent me from performing routine maintenance, including testing the secondary flow channels. The final piece materialized when Tom Rodriguez contacted with information that would destroy Barbara's credibility permanently. He'd been recording his conversations with law enforcement, documenting Barbara's attempted bribery. Daniel, she offered me $21,000 yesterday, said if I could make it appear like you sabotaged the controls yourself, she'd guarantee I received a promotion and salary increase. I've got everything recorded, $21,000 for false testimony. Barbara had crossed from civil disputes into federal felony territory. That evening, I sat with Elena on our dock, listening to the gentle movement of water against the pilings. The smell of approaching rain hung heavy in the atmosphere, and I could taste the electricity of the coming storm. Tomorrow's the day, I told her. Barbaros made her choice, and now I must make mine. Elena squeezed my hand. Your grandfather would be proud. Sometimes standing up for what's right means making difficult choices. Tuesday morning, Barbara would discover that some battles aren't won by whoever has the most expensive attorneys or the loudest media campaign. Sometimes they're won by whoever best understands the law, the physics of water, and the weight of family heritage. Tuesday morning dawned clear and unusually cold, the kind of day that makes everything seem sharper, more defined. I arrived at the lake control facility at 7:45 with Patricia, Frank, and a small army of media representatives who had been following the story. Barbara was already there with her private security team, two sheriff's deputies, and enough lawyers to staff a small firm. She'd positioned herself between me and the control structures like some kind of environmental general, making her last stand. You will not pass, she announced to the gathering crowd, her voice carrying that particular pitch of desperation disguised as authority. I am protecting this community from a dangerous individual who threatens our way of life. Channel 7 News had set up cameras. The county sheriff himself had come to oversee what everyone knew would be the final confrontation. Even some resort investors had driven down from Charlotte, probably calculating how much money they stood to lose. I walked up to the concrete housing that concealed the flow control mechanisms, carrying the folder containing a century of legal documentation and Frank's official letter transferring waterway operation authority to me. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the crowd, my voice carrying across the morning air, I'm here to perform routine maintenance on secondary water management systems that have been operated by my family since 1922. Barbara stepped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the acrid scent of panic sweat. I have a federal restraining order preventing you from approaching this equipment. Patricia stepped forward smoothly, handing a document to the sheriff. Your Honor, that restraining order was superseded by federal water rights enforcement yesterday evening. Mr. Rivera has full legal authority to operate these systems. The sheriff read the document carefully, nodded, and stepped aside. Ma'am, he has federal jurisdiction here. You need to move back. That's when Barbara truly lost it. This is insane, she screamed at the cameras. You're going to let this lunatic destroy a $7 million investment because of some piece of paper from 1922. People like him don't belong in our community. People like him. On live television, Barbara had just revealed exactly what this fight had always been about. Not HOA rules, or architectural standards, or community safety. This was about class, about who deserved to belong in her vision of an exclusive lakefront paradise. I knelt down beside the concrete housing and began removing the access panel with tools Frank had provided. Each bolt came loose, with a metallic ring of finality, and I could hear the crowd holding its collective breath. Mr. Rivera called a reporter from Channel 7. Can you explain exactly what you're doing? I'm opening secondary flow channels that were designed by my grandfather in I replied, not looking up from my work. These channels allow controlled release of excess water during maintenance operations. Everything I'm doing is completely legal under federal water rights law and normal waterway operation procedures. The access panel came free, revealing the massive brass wheel that controlled the bypass valves. Frank had oiled the mechanism the week before, and it turned with surprising ease for something nearly a century old. The story was far from over, but in that moment, standing at those controls, with the weight of history and law on my side, I knew that Barbara had finally met her match. The water would decide the rest. HOA destroyed my lakefront resort, Part 3. The reckoning. Barbara made one final desperate attempt to physically stop me. "Sheriff!" she practically shrieked, pointing dramatically at me with a trembling finger. "He's going to drain our entire lake. He's destroying private property. Arrest him immediately." Sheriff Martinez looked at her with the patient expression of a man who had dealt with far too many HOA disputes throughout his career. "Ma'am, this is federal jurisdiction and completely legal waterway operations. I cannot arrest a man for operating a valve he has documented legal authority to control." I gave the heavy brass wheel for complete turns clockwise, somewhere deep within the lake control structure. Century-old mechanisms responded exactly as my grandfather Antonio had designed them over 100 years ago. Water began flowing powerfully through the secondary bypass channels with a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The assembled crowd watched in absolute fascination as the lake water level began dropping at a clearly visible rate. Within 25 minutes, you could distinctly see the waterline receding from the resort's expensive dock pilings, exposing dark green algae and accumulated sediment. Barbara stood frozen, watching her $7 million investment literally draining away before her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You can't do this. You can't just destroy everything we've built here." I stood up, brushing accumulated dirt off my work pants, and faced the cameras directly for my final public statement. "Mrs. Whitmore, I offered you reasonable compromise. I offered you good faith negotiation. I offered you respect for both your investment and my family's century-old legacy. You chose warfare instead. This is what losing a water rights war looks like." The resort's boat docks were already becoming completely unusable. By late evening, the entire pristine shoreline would be exposed, muddy terrain. Barbara's grand opening celebration, scheduled for the following weekend, would be an absolute disaster. But the most beautiful sound of the morning wasn't the rushing water or the clicking news cameras. It was elderly Mrs. Martinez's voice, carrying clearly across the crowd. "Welcome home, Daniel. Your grandfather would be tremendously proud of you today." The lake dropped exactly 21 inches over the subsequent 7 hours. By sunset that Tuesday, the resort's million-dollar boat slips were sitting in exposed mud, and their grand opening weekend was officially canceled. The construction bank called their $7 million loan that same evening, demanding immediate payment. But here's the crucial thing about water and fair justice. It's patient and it's equitable. Within 36 hours, I'd restored completely normal flow to the lake system. The resort investors, suddenly extremely interested in negotiating with the person who controlled their water supply, made me an offer I could actually respect and accept. "Mr. Rivera," said James Chun, the lead investor representing the development group, "we'd like to propose a partnership arrangement. You maintain your historic pavilion as a protected landmark, we get guaranteed stable water levels for operations, and everyone wins." The formal agreement took 3 weeks to negotiate and finalize. My waterfront pavilion would be preserved as a registered historic landmark. I would guarantee minimum water levels for resort operations. In exchange, the resort would pay me $50,000 annually for water management services and establish a community heritage fund in my grandfather's name. Barbara was long gone before the ink dried on the contracts. Last I heard, she'd relocated to Arizona after facing federal charges for attempted bribery, conspiracy, and systematic misuse of HOA funds. Her husband, Richard lost his property management business permanently and had to sell their luxury estate to pay mounting legal fees and restitution. The newly elected HOA board, led by Mrs. Martinez and Tom Rodriguez, established the Rivera Pavilion Historic District. My grandfather's waterfront pavilion became the centerpiece of a community heritage trail that actually brought significantly more tourists and positive attention than Barbara's exclusive resort vision ever could have generated. Property values didn't collapse catastrophically like Barbara had constantly predicted. They actually increased substantially. Turns out people genuinely prefer living in authentic communities, with real history and neighbors who respect each other, rather than corporate developments managed like private kingdoms. Elena and I used our newfound local recognition to establish the Antonio Garcia Rivera Water Rights Scholarship for engineering students at Clemson University. Funded by speaking fees from the numerous water rights conferences where I've shared this story, it's already helped 8 students pursue environmental engineering degrees. The first scholarship recipient was Maria Rodriguez, Tom's daughter, who wants. The ceremony was held at the historic pavilion, naturally, with the entire community celebrating together. Tom got promoted to resort operations manager and hired back all the employees Barbara had laid off during her reign of terror. The resort now donates 6% of its profits to local environmental, education programs and sponsors an annual heritage festival that celebrates our community's history. Frank Wilson came out of retirement temporarily to train me on advanced waterway control operations, and I've become the official water management consultant for 4 other lake communities facing similar HOA disputes. Turns out there are numerous barbaries out there, and many forgotten water rights waiting to be by determined property owners. The legal precedent we established has been cited in 17 other federal water rights cases across the Southeast region. Patricia tells me we've probably prevented dozens of communities from getting bulldozed by wealthy developers who thought money and political connections could override century-old established law. My waterfront pavilion is now officially listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Every morning I walk across those weathered wooden planks my grandfather Antonio laid with his own determined hands, and I can almost hear him chuckling about how his water management system saved the day. The resort development thrives successfully. The community is stronger and more united than ever, and our lake has become a regional model for how modern development and historical preservation can coexist peacefully when people choose cooperation over domination. Barbara's story became a cautionary tale about the inherent dangers of unchecked HOA power and corrupt leadership. Last month, the state legislature passed the Rivera Protection Act, requiring all HOA boards to respect pre-existing water rights and registered historic structures. Small legislative victories, but they accumulate significantly. Elena and I are expecting our first child next spring. They'll grow up running across that historic wooden pavilion, learning to fish from the same dock where I learned from my father. Some family legacies are absolutely worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. The best part, our new neighbors actually genuinely appreciate having us around. We've become the go-to family for community gatherings, and I've helped 4 different homeowners navigate their own HOA disputes without anyone having to drain any lakes. But if you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare situation, remember this fundamental principle. Knowledge is genuine power. History matters profoundly, and sometimes the best weapon against bureaucratic bullying is understanding the law significantly better than the bullies do. Drop a comment with your own HOA horror story. I read every single one, and I've got practical ideas for dealing with these petty tyrants. And if you want to hear about the corrupt city council that attempted to steal an elderly farmer's land through eminent domain proceedings, and how century-old mineral rights saved her family farm, hit that subscribe button. That's a story for next time. The distinctive sound of children's laughter echoes off the historic pavilion structure now, mixed with the gentle lapping of water that knows exactly where it belongs. Friday morning brought unexpected visitors that would test everything I'd learned about water rights and community leadership. I'm reviewing monthly water quality reports on my laptop when 3 black SUVs pull up to the pavilion. Out step 6 individuals in federal agency jackets, Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Rivera, the lead investigator, a stern woman named Agent Sarah Mitchell, displayed official credentials. We're investigating allegations of unauthorized water manipulation affecting interstate waterways. We need to inspect your control systems immediately. My stomach dropped. Barbara might be gone, but apparently she'd filed one final vindictive complaint before disappearing. I called Patricia immediately while the agents began their inspection. The investigation lasted 3 intensive days. They examined every single valve, tested water samples, reviewed historical engineering documents, and interviewed dozens of community members. Frank Wilson provided crucial testimony about proper waterway management protocols. Tom Rodriguez shared evidence of Barbara's attempted bribery and systematic harassment campaign. On the 3rd day, Agent Mitchell called me to the pavilion for their findings. Mr. Rivera, not only did you operate entirely within legal parameters, but your water management practices actually improved environmental conditions. The lake ecosystem is healthier now than it's been in 20 years. She handed me an official document. We're recommending you for the EPA's Outstanding Water Stewardship Award. Your work here should be a model for private water rights management nationwide. The award ceremony took place at the pavilion 6 weeks later. State representatives, environmental advocates, and community leaders gathered to celebrate responsible water management. The irony was perfect. Barbara had tried to destroy me with federal agencies, and instead, those same agencies were honoring my work. During the ceremony, I met Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a water rights attorney who'd been following my case. "Daniel," she said, "I represent 12 communities facing similar situations. Would you consider consulting? Your expertise could help hundreds of families protect their heritage." That conversation launched Rivera Water Rights Consulting. Within a year, I was working with communities across 5 states, helping ordinary people understand and exercise their historical water rights. Alina joined as business manager, handling contracts and client relations. One case particularly stood out: the Martinez family in Georgia, facing a situation eerily similar to mine. A wealthy developer wanted their historic watermill for a luxury spa resort. Using the strategies I developed, we discovered their 18th century water rights gave them control over the entire creek system the resort needed. The developer settled within 3 weeks, agreeing to preserve the watermill and pay annual water access fees. Mrs. Martinez cried when she called with the news. "You saved our family's 300-year legacy, Mr. Rivera. How can we ever thank you?" That's when I realized this fight had never been just about my pavilion. It was about every family fighting to preserve their heritage against powerful interests who believe money can erase history. The consulting work also revealed a disturbing pattern. HOA abuse was far more widespread than anyone realized. Barbara wasn't an anomaly. She was representative of a systemic problem where unelected boards wielded enormous power with minimal oversight. I testified before the state legislature 3 times, sharing evidence of HOA financial misconduct, selective enforcement, and systematic harassment. The Rivera Protection Act was just the beginning. Additional legislation followed, requiring HOA financial audits, term limits for board members, and mandatory arbitration before legal action. Not everyone appreciated these reforms. I received threatening letters from HOA board presidents across the state. One particularly aggressive message warned me to stop interfering with private governance. Patricia traced it back to a regional HOA management company that was losing lucrative contracts due to the new transparency requirements. But for every threat, I received dozens of thank you messages from homeowners who'd been freed from oppressive HOA control. One elderly couple sent a handwritten note: "You gave us back our home. We can finally breathe again." As our daughter Sophie grows, I sometimes wonder what lessons she'll take from this experience. Not the anger or conflict, I hope, but the understanding that standing up for what's right often requires courage, persistence, and thorough knowledge of the law. Elena and I still walk to the pavilion most evenings, watching the sunset paint the water golden red. The sound of water lapping against the pilings is peaceful now, no longer carrying the undercurrent of conflict. Sometimes I see Barbara's face in my mind, twisted with rage, as she watched the water drain away. I don't feel satisfaction exactly. More like sadness that it had to come to that. She could have chosen cooperation. She could have respected history while building something new. Instead, she chose domination and lost everything. The resort continues to thrive under new management. They've embraced the historic pavilion as a unique asset rather than an eyesore. Wedding parties now request the pavilion as their ceremony venue. The resort features it prominently in marketing materials, where history meets luxury. Last month, the new resort manager, Jennifer Walsh, approached me with an idea. "Daniel, what if we created a water education center at the pavilion? Teach kids about water rights, environmental stewardship, historic preservation. We could fund it through the Heritage Program." The Antonio Rivera Water Education Center opened last week. School groups visit weekly, learning about water management, local history, and the importance of protecting natural resources. My grandfather's legacy now educates future generations. I often think about that morning when I first turned the brass wheel, watching the water drain away. It wasn't really about revenge, though it felt like justice. It was about proving that ordinary people can stand up to powerful interests when they understand their rights and refuse to be intimidated. The lake knows where it belongs now. The community knows its value. And somewhere, I hope my grandfather Antonio is smiling, knowing that his careful planning and foresight protected our family legacy for another generation and helped countless others along the way. 3 years have passed since that confrontation at the water controls. The pavilion has become more than just a family landmark. It's a symbol of what happens when ordinary people refuse to be bullied by those who mistake wealth for wisdom and power for righteousness. Frank Wilson passed away last winter, peacefully in his sleep at his funeral. Dozens of people shared stories about how he'd helped them understand the lake, respect the water, and appreciate the delicate balance between human needs and natural systems. The water rights consulting business has grown beyond anything I imagined. We now employ 6 full-time attorneys and 3 environmental engineers. Our case success rate is over 90%, and we've helped preserve over 200 historic properties across the Southeast. Tom Rodriguez's daughter, Maria, graduated top of her class and now works with our consulting firm part-time while completing her master's degree. She brings fresh perspectives on climate change adaptation and sustainable water management. Sometimes late at night, when Sophia is asleep and Elena is reading beside me, I walk down to the dock and listen to the water. It sounds different now, not threatening or contested, but peaceful. The lake has found its equilibrium again, just as our community has. I've learned that water is the ultimate teacher of patience and persistence. It doesn't force or fight. It simply flows according to natural law, finding its level, carving its path. Barbara tried to control it through force and manipulation. I succeeded by understanding it and working with its nature. The legal reforms we helped initiate have spread to neighboring states. Other communities have adopted similar protections for historic properties and water rights. The movement continues to grow, powered not by political connections, but by the belief that heritage matters. What I do know is this. Standing at those water controls 3 years ago, turning that century-old brass wheel, I wasn't just defending my property. I was defending every person who's been told they don't matter. That progress requires their sacrifice, that money and power trump justice. Sophia will grow up knowing this story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson about courage and the importance of standing up for what's right. She'll learn that her great-great-grandfather Antonio built more than a pavilion. He built a legacy that continues to protect our family and community. As I write this, sitting on the pavilion porch with afternoon sun warming the old planks, I can see children playing in the Water Education Center, tourists photographing the structure, and resort guests enjoying the view that almost didn't exist. This is the lesson I hope everyone takes from my story. Know your rights. Document everything. Never let fear prevent you from standing up for what's yours. And remember that sometimes the best way to win isn't through aggression, but through patience, knowledge, and the courage to act when the moment comes. The sound of children's laughter echoes across the water as the sun sets. My grandfather's dream endures. The community thrives, And the lake continues its eternal flow, teaching us that some things are worth fighting for, and some legacies are too important to let fade away. HOA destroyed my lakefront resort Part 4. The legacy 5 years after the water wars, as locals now call it. I'm standing on the pavilion dock watching my daughter Sophia teach a group of elementary school children about water conservation. She's 7 years old and already lecturing them about riparian ecosystems with the confidence of someone 3 times her age. "Daddy," one little girl asks me, pointing at the brass control wheel displayed behind protective glass, "is it true you drained the whole lake with that?" Sophia answers, before I can, "Not the whole lake, silly. Just 21 inches. Granton Antonio designed it so the water would always come back. The Antonio Rivera Water Education Center has hosted over 12,000 visitors since open. Schools from 6 states schedule field trips here. The program has become so popular that we had to hire 3 full-time educators and limit group sizes. Elena manages the education center now. Having left her corporate job 2 years ago, she's transformed it from a simple museum into an interactive learning experience. Kids don't just hear about water rights and environmental stewardship, they participate in hands-on experiments, explore the historic pavilion, and even operate replica control mechanisms. The consulting business continues to thrive. We've expanded to 12 attorneys and 5 environmental engineers. Our success rate remains above 90%, and we've now helped preserve over 400 historic properties across 9 states. Last month, we won a landmark case in Tennessee involving a 200-year-old grist mill threatened by a shopping center development. The developers had offered the family $3 million to relocate. Using strategies similar to my own case, we discovered their water rights gave them veto power over any development affecting the creek system. The mall was built elsewhere, the mill was preserved, and the family now operates it as a profitable tourist attraction. Patricia retired from active practice last year, but remains as senior counsel. At her retirement party, she pulled me aside. "Daniel, when you first called me about Barbara and that HOA, I thought it was just another property dispute. I had no idea we'd start a movement." She wasn't exaggerating. The legal precedents we established have been cited in over 70 federal cases. Law schools now teach the Rivera case as an example of how historical water rights interact with modern development law. The Rivera Protection Act has been adopted in various forms by 8 states. Each version strengthens protections for historic properties and requires HOA boards to undergo ethics training. Some states have gone further, implementing term limits and mandatory financial audits. Not everyone appreciates these changes. I still receive occasional threatening messages from HOA management companies and board members who resent the new oversight. Last year, someone vandalized the pavilion with spray paint. "Rivera, go home." The community response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, 50 volunteers had cleaned up the graffiti, and a local artist had created a beautiful mural celebrating the pavilion's history. Tom Rodriguez retired from the resort last month. At his farewell party, he shared something I'd never known. "Daniel, that day Barbara offered me money to sabotage the controls. She told me you were crazy, said you'd destroy the whole lake, and everyone would lose their homes." I believed her at first. Then I saw the engineering plans you showed Frank. I realized you understood that water better than anyone. That's when I knew who to trust. His daughter Maria now leads our environmental engineering division. She's developed innovative water management protocols that balance development needs with ecological preservation. 3 other states have adopted her framework as best practices for lake community development. The resort has become a genuine community partner rather than an isolated luxury enclave. Jennifer Walsh implemented profit sharing with local businesses, hired predominantly from the community, and established a scholarship fund for hospitality students. Property values have increased 42% since Barbara's departure, proving that inclusive development benefits everyone. Mrs. Martinez, now 89, still walks to the pavilion most mornings. Last week she told me that in all her years here, she'd never seen the community so united. Barbara divided us with fear and greed. "You've brought us together with courage and principle." I didn't correct her attribution. The credit belongs to my grandfather, to Frank Wilson, to everyone who stood up when it mattered. I've testified before Congress twice about the need for federal HOA reform. The first hearing was sparsely attended, mostly staffers taking notes. The second, 6 months ago, drew national media coverage. 3 senators introduced legislation based partly on our recommendations. It's still working through committees, but progress is progress. The scholarship fund has grown beyond anything I imagined. 18 students have received full-ride engineering scholarships. 7 have already graduated and are working in water resource management. 1, Michael Chun, from a low-income family in Alabama, just published groundbreaking research on sustainable irrigation systems for drought. Elena is pregnant with our second child. We're having a boy, and we've already decided on his name. Antonio, after his great-great. Sophia is excited about being a big sister, though she's informed us that baby Antonio will need to learn about water rights before he can play on the dock. Last month, I received a letter from Barbara, not an email this time, but actual handwritten pages on expensive stationery. She wrote about her life in Arizona, her divorce from Richard, her work with a non-profit helping low-income families navigate housing disputes. The letter's last paragraph surprised me. I spent 3 years being angry at you, another 2 in therapy understanding why. I finally realized you weren't my enemy. You were a mirror, showing me what I'd become. I'm trying to be better. Elena encouraged me to respond. I spent a week composing a reply, finally settling on 3 words. Good luck, Barbara. Some people need forgiveness. Some need space to find their own way. I hope she finds whatever peace she's looking for. The EPA award sits on a shelf in my office, but it's not the recognition I'm proudest of. That honor goes to the community celebration held here last year. Over 800 people attended, including families we'd helped through the consulting business, students from the education center, and neighbors who'd supported us through the fight. The mayor presented me with a proclamation declaring October 15th as Heritage Protection Day, commemorating the day I opened those water controls. It's not a legal holiday, just a symbolic recognition that sometimes ordinary citizens have to stand up to protect what matters. I've been approached multiple times about writing a book or selling movie rights to my story. Publishers have made generous offers. A production company offered 6 figures just for the option. I've declined everything. This isn't a story about one man's victory. It's about what happens when communities remember that power comes from citizens, not institutions. Instead, I've started a free online resource documenting water rights laws across all 50 states. With help from law students and retired attorneys, we're building a comprehensive database that anyone can access. Knowledge shouldn't be expensive or complicated. It should be available to everyone who needs it. The website gets over 50,000 visitors monthly. We've added forums where people can share experiences, ask questions, and find local attorneys specializing in property rights. It's become a genuine community of people helping people, which is what my grandfather would have wanted. Sophia has started asking questions about what happened with Barbara. She's old enough now to understand conflict and resolution, young enough to see things with moral clarity that adults often lose. Why did Mrs. Whitmore want to destroy Grandpa's pavilion? She asked last week. I thought carefully about my answer. Sometimes people forget that new isn't always better than old. That expensive isn't always more valuable than meaningful. Mrs. Whitmore thought her resort was more important than our family's history. She was wrong. Sophia considered this, then asked the harder question. Did you hurt her when you drained the water? I had to be honest. Yes, I did. I hurt her business and her pride. Sometimes protecting something important means others get hurt. But I also gave her choices, and she made hers. These conversations with Sophia remind me that what we do echoes beyond our immediate circumstances. She'd tell her children about the water wars, about standing up for family legacy, about the delicate balance between progress and preservation. And maybe, when she faces her own impossible choices, she remembered that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear because something matters more than comfort. The pavilion itself continues to age gracefully. We've made necessary repairs while preserving its historic character. The wood my grandfather cut and shaped a century ago still supports the structure. The brass fittings he installed still function. It's a testament to craftsmanship and thoughtful engineering. I've documented everything about the pavilion's construction and the water control system, detailed plans, maintenance procedures, historical context. If something happens to me, Sophia will have the knowledge to protect it, and if she chooses not to, that will be her decision to make. The lake community has transformed in ways both visible and subtle. There's a different energy now. People attend HOA meetings, not out of fear, but genuine interest in community governance. Board members serve because they want to contribute, not control. It's not perfect, but it's better. Last weekend, the community held its 5th annual Heritage Festival at the pavilion. Over 2,000 people attended. Local artisans displayed crafts, musicians performed, families picnicked on the grounds. The resort provided catering at cost, and Jennifer Walsh gave a speech about the importance of honoring history while building the future. During the festival, a teenage boy approached me. "Mr. Rivera, my grandma told me you saved this place from being torn down." Is that true? I explained that I didn't save anything alone, that it took a community, lawyers, engineers, and most importantly, my grandfather's foresight in securing those water rights a century ago. He thought about this, then asked what he could do if his family ever faced something similar. I gave him the answer I give everyone who asks. Learn your rights. Document everything. Never let anyone convince you that their money or authority makes them more important than your heritage. And remember that water teaches patience. Rivers carve canyons, not through force, but persistence. As I finish writing this, sitting on the pavilion porch where I've spent countless hours over the past 5 years, I can hear Sophia leading another tour group. Her voice carries across the water, confident and clear, explaining how her great-great-grandfather built this place with his own hands. The evening sun paints the lake golden, the same view my grandfather saw a century ago. The resort lights are beginning to twinkle in the distance. Somewhere in the community, families are sitting down to dinner, children are playing, neighbors are talking over fences. This is what we fought for. Not just a building or property rights, or even justice, though those mattered. We fought for the principle that heritage has value, that ordinary people can stand against powerful institutions, that communities thrive when they honor both past and future. Barbara once told me that people like me didn't belong in her vision of the community. She was right, but not how she meant. I don't belong in a community built on exclusion and control. One belong in a community built on respect, shared history, and the understanding that true strength comes from unity, not authority. The brass control wheel that started everything is now behind museum glass, a symbol of what happens when technical knowledge meets moral courage. But the real controls, the ones that matter, aren't mechanical. They're the choices we make about what to fight for, when to compromise, and how to use power when we have it. My grandfather Antonio built a pavilion that lasted a century. I hope I built something that lasts longer. A template for protecting heritage, a movement for HOA reform, and a demonstration that ordinary people with extraordinary determination can change their world. The water continues its eternal cycle, indifferent to human drama, teaching anyone willing to learn. It taught me patience when I wanted revenge. It taught me precision when emotion clouded judgment. And it taught me that true power isn't about domination. It's about understanding natural law and working within it rather than against it. Sophia calls out that dinner is ready. Elena stands in the pavilion doorway, silhouetted against the warm interior light, one hand on her growing belly. This is our legacy now. Family, community, and the knowledge that some battles are worth fighting, not because we'll definitely win, but because not fighting means losing something irreplaceable. The lake knows where it belongs. The pavilion stands where my grandfather built it. The community thrives in ways Barbara never imagined. And somewhere, I hope other families facing their own Barbaras find courage in this story to stand up and say, "Not my heritage. Not Today. Not ever. As darkness settles over the water and stars begin to emerge, I take one last look at the pavilion before joining my family for dinner. The old wood creaks under my feet. The same sound my grandfather heard, the water laps against the pilings, the same rhythm that's played for a century. This is what endures. Not wealth or power or political connections, but the courage to protect what matters and the wisdom to know when to fight. My grandfather gave me the tools. The community gave me support. The water taught me patience. And together, we proved that some legacies are too important to let fade away. Tomorrow, another school group will visit. More children will learn about water rights, environmental stewardship, and standing up for principles. And every one of them will leave, knowing that they too have the power to protect what matters, if only they have the courage to try.